state budget is finally here. This week, lawmakers got the spending plan over the finish line. Our expert panel breaks down what's in it, what's not, and what's next. Hi everybody, I'm Ryan Peterson here on Empire State Weekly. Welcome into Albany. New York has a newly passed state budget, some 32 days after the deadline. Not only does it fund all those state programs, there are a few policy changes included in it as well. So here's a little bit of a breakdown of some of the bigger items making it into that $229 billion plan. Judges now have more discretion in issuing bail, as the least restrictive means standard has been removed. $1 billion is being provided to overhaul the state's mental health care system. The state will also see a minimum wage increase, $17 an hour, by the year 2027, with future increases pegged to inflation. A few key items that did not make it into the budget. No funding allocated for the governor's big housing compact, right? That plan to add 800,000 new homes over the next decade. Governor Hochul had argued the measure would help solve the affordability crisis. She says this will be one of her top priorities now moving forward that the budget is done. One big push leading up to the spending plan as well, universal school meals, which would have required $280 million to fully fund. The state instead has opted with $134 million, which will cover all those eligible plus an additional 25%. All right, and joining us now to break down the state budget, our expert panel, Blair Horner, Executive Director of New York Public Interest Research Group, and our Capitol correspondent, Jamie DeLine. Welcome. Nice to see you both in studio together.
Thank you so much for having us.
This is fantastic, of course. So Blair, let's start with you. 32 days past the deadline, we finally have the spending plan in place. What does that say to average Joe New Yorker out there?
Well, you know, it's another one of those little hits to New Yorkers. You know, lawmakers are supposed to get the budget done by April 1st. That's what the law says. When you're a month late, it makes people even more cynical about state government's ability to do its work. And a lot of what was happening was done behind closed doors, and a lot of the deals that were hammered out, nobody even got a chance to see them until they were voting on them. So it was a lousy process. It was really, it felt like back to the bad old days in Albany.
And Jamie, what were you hearing amongst the halls? I mean, it seemed every week we're hearing about an extender being passed, and Controller Tom DiNapoli, you know, sending that letter each time to the governor saying, look, you got to get one or the other done or people aren't going to get paid.
Exactly. I think there was a total of about 5 extenders that were passed, and state workers wanted to get paid on time. And in order for that to happen, you need those extenders. So multiple extenders over the course of the month took place, and ultimately they were able to get the budget done. And some are questioning whether or not the late process was worth it in the end.
Right, because it put off other work, which we will get to in a moment. But let's talk about some of the key items that were included this year. Everybody, of course, the School Boards Association, who we talked to in this show, ecstatic that the foundation aid formula is fully funded for the first time since that formula came about in 2007.
Yeah, I mean, there were big winners in terms of spending because the state was awash in cash. And so school aid went up, there was extra spending on health care. And so I think on the spending side, there was a lot of pressure to spend more money. Whether or not the state has squirreled enough money away for the out years, I think is going to be the big question, because the federal COVID money dries up after this year, and then the state is facing increasingly big budget deficits.
And the Thruway Authority is a big issue, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the governor originally proposed a budget of $227 billion, and the final budget ended up being $2 billion over that, $229 billion in total. And Republicans had an issue with that. They said this is so much spending, and they were comparing it to other states, saying that New York definitely went above and beyond.
And when we look at one of the other big ticket items, so when it comes to education, that universal lunch program, which a lot of people were yelling for, like to see all students have access to that free lunch. State opting not to fully fund that, but throwing some more money towards it. So not only are all those families who are eligible, but also an extra, I think 25% or so will be able to obtain that free lunch. Is that something that's worth spending the money on, Blair?
Well,
if it's there, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a year where you have big surpluses, making sure that students have full bellies when they're trying to learn, I think makes a lot of sense, and you can make a very good argument. It's good public policy. But where you start to feel the pinch will be in years 2, 3, and 4 of the Hochul administration, whether or not the money's still there, because every year the budget has to be done all over again. It's better to stick the stake in the ground in terms of what you want to spend money on, and that's certainly an important one. But maintaining it over time, I think, is going to be the real trick.
Which I think was probably the issue, Jamie, with the governor's housing compact, which was not included, and that's something she played up multiple times, building 800,000 new homes over the next 10 years. And she says that's going to be her top priority now moving forward.
Yes, she says from now until the end of session, which is in June, she wants to focus on housing conversations. And if she doesn't get it done during this session, she's saying this could possibly be in the budget for next year.
And we're coming up end of session awfully quick. Do we go late? You know, we talked about just a few moments ago, there's a lot of work that didn't get done because the budget was so delayed.
Yeah, you know, when you back up a budget an extra month, when you added an extra month to the budget debate, that means you have one fewer month left to deal with all of the non-budget issues. The legislative session is typically around 6 months. The first half deals with the budget, the second half deals with non-budget issues. They just gobbled up a month of that. And so it's going to be a lot harder to get a lot of things done, but there's a lot of pent-up demand from advocacy groups and lawmakers to deal with other issues.
And Jamie, what have you heard out of Assembly Speaker Heastie's office? Are they going to end on time, or do they go long?
So at this point, Speaker Hastie says that he's not expecting it to go longer, but you know, time will tell. It's Albany. Anything can happen.
Right? When we talk about the budget, Blair, you know, the budget's supposed to be spending, how the money's going to get spent. But year after year, we see policy items work their way in, and there were a lot of them this time around.
Yeah, I mean, the reason the budget was late, the real reason why it started late, was the governor was demanding policy changes, particularly in the area of criminal justice reform. And while everything is connected to the budget, you can certainly make an argument that way. Certainly, those were really essentially not a non-budget issue. And so that fight over what to do about bail reform in particular gobbled up a lot of airtime and slowed down the process of negotiating, as Jamie mentioned, the $229 billion that the state was going to spend. So, and then as the budget ran late, more policy got dumped in it because you wanted to, there was that pent-up demand for the non-budget items that are going to be dealt with over the next 6 years.
One of the last ones too that came about were extending or increasing the charter school cap down in New York City. I mean, are they using the budget process as like leverage to force this stuff
Well,
in?
I mean, the governor has a lot of leverage in the budget debate, and so she uses the budget as a way to drive her agenda. But then when you get into the horse trading aspect of it, lawmakers in both parties, both houses, they have their own items too. So it ends up getting what we call the big ugly at the end of the budget process, one bill that encapsulates so many not connected issues.
Jamie, of course, the Democrats enjoy really that super majority here in Albany. Republican lawmakers, again, angered with the amount of money that's being spent. What are some of the other issues that they're most concerned with now as we come into the end of session here?
So I know we mentioned bail reform earlier. It did get into the budget. So now the least restrictive means standard is going to be taken out of the law when it comes to New York State bail laws. So they are happy with that, but they think that the governor could have gone a step further. So that's one of the issues that they're talking about.
And what else can we expect in these last few weeks here, Blair? What do you think, aside from housing and possibly bail reform, will be the biggest topics up for discussion?
I mean, there'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 bills that are actually going to get acted on over the next 5 weeks. So what's one big person's big issue is another person's small issue, right? So it depends where you sit. But I think one of the big fights is going to be between the parties is going to be over some of the cost issues. I mean, Jamie mentioned it before about how Republicans were taking on the issue of the state Democrats spending money. But I think that that's going to play out, particularly as you're looking into an election year in '24. How many votes will Democrats be willing to take to try to make New York more affordable as compared to just funding programs?
Right, because it's awfully easy to look at, as you said, being flush with cash and wanting to spend it, but not taking the time to look at those
and you know, the comptroller mentioned there was billions of dollars in money that really is not accounted for that's in the budget, and that the state is facing out-year budget deficits. And so how do you deal with all of that stuff? I think is really going to be a big challenge. That being said, there'll always be issues on climate that are going to come up, and the environment. There's always going to be issues with regard to health care. Things will keep coming up, non-budget issues that are going to keep coming up through the end of the session on June 8th, supposedly.
Supposedly. time will tell. Blair Horner, Jamie DeLine, thank you so much. Nice to see you both in studio. State budget giving some significant investment to education in the state, right? When we return, hear from an official from the State School Board Association on that funding and what the state budget will mean for school budget plans in local municipalities throughout the state. And remember, if you've got a comment, story idea, please let us know. You can always email us at news@news10.com or reach out on Twitter @WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. New York's budget sets out some big funding increases for education statewide. Schools in the state receiving $34.5 billion in total spending. The SUNY and CUNY schools receiving $2.4 billion to benefit capital projects and to upgrade some campus facilities. Additionally, the foundation aid formula, which allocates money for schools based on need, has been fully funded with $24 billion. All right, and joining us now to give us some additional insight on the state's funding for schools, Brian Fessler, Director of Government Relations for the New York State School Boards Association. Brian, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So the budget, now some 32 days past its deadline, finally in place here. With budget votes coming up in local districts all over the state, how much easier is that process going to be now knowing that that foundation aid is fully funded?
Yeah, I think that's the big success of this budget for schools. Since the first time, since 2007, when the foundation aid formula was put into place, the 2023-24 state budget and school district budgets are going to have a fully funded foundation aid formula. So that drives a lot of dollars. This year in particular, more than $2.5 billion in new foundation aid for schools. That's the main operating aid for school districts, the largest single aid category for schools. I think you're going to see a lot of budgets that at a minimum maintain the programs and services that students have had access to in recent years, and in some cases continue to expand to address areas of need, whether it's on the academic side or social support side. So certainly, there's going to be varying degrees of, support for districts, as is always the case. But I think on average, on the aggregate statewide, schools are in a very strong position as we head into the new school year due to the state budget. Right,
because as we know, education is the largest component typically of the state budget. And in years past, there's been a lot of fights over that. It's the one thing everybody seemed to have agreed on this year. And you talk about foundation, and you talk about that it's a formula. And for people who are unfamiliar, kind of simply, how does that work? And do you think the formula needs to have been updated now that we find ourselves in 2023 as opposed to 2007 when it first came out?
Well, I'm sure you could do, an entire week's worth of shows on the foundation aid formula itself, but trying to spare that. The formula basically tries to say how much does it cost to educate a student and how much can the local district afford with the state meeting the gap. But as I said, that formula has been in place for now almost 2 decades. There's been a lot of changes over that time. So even if the basic concept makes sense, we do think the formula should be looked at, revised, updated, improved. We were hoping the state budget would include some seed money, some funding to allow the state education department to do that in a more meaningful way. Unfortunately, the state budget did not include that money, but that work still needs to be done. And so we're already engaging conversations with our partner organizations around the state to try to effectuate that process so that we can have, the new and improved formula for foundation aid or whatever it may be called as we head into 24-25.
One of the big pushes that was up for debate too was those universal meals to have school meals be free for everybody, regardless of your family's financial situation. It didn't make it in. $134 million going towards that program, and so those who are eligible will still get that free meal. Is that still beneficial in your eyes, or would you have liked to have seen that universal coverage?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we would have loved to see full universal school meals, regardless of the particular needs of a student and their family for that day, for that week, for that year, regardless of the district. While that said, while that's not in there, the state investment made, as you said, $134 million or so in new money. That is huge. That's meaningful. That's significant, and that will support the cost for meals for thousands of students across the state. So it's going to be not universal, a little bit more hyper focused on particular need. There are challenges with that. That's also understanding from the state's perspective, and so not the whole thing. But we're very pleased with the advocacy our organization had, and really thousands throughout the state really focused on this issue. So we appreciate all of the legislative support in both houses across both aisles, and to the governor for agreeing to support this meaningful and I think impactful investment for school meals for our students.
Substantial amount earmarked for pre-K programs as well. How important is that, Brian?
Yeah, this is, an area of investment that we've seen a lot of growth in recent years. And I think that's because of the demand that our schools and our families are seeing, but then also, reflective of the positive outcomes that some of these early engagements, before kindergarten have shown to lead throughout a student's academic career in elementary school and high school. There are a lot of barriers. Cost is the biggest one for school districts to be able to provide these programs and to fill these seats. There's facility needs, there's transportation needs, but $150 million in this budget in new funding will continue to allow districts where there's an interest, and there is a lot of it, to fund the additional seats. So we're supportive of it, and I think this is a long trend that we've seen that's really positive for our students in schools.
Brian, real quick, before I let you go, as far as this effort on the state's part now to eliminate those Native American mascots, the names and imagery from our schools around the state, some schools I know have been worried about what it will cost them to replace some of the athletic gear and the logos and have new stuff made up. Has there been any concern about the state helping them out with that cost?
Yeah, I know we've heard that from some districts and from some of our members. I think from the state's perspective, not trying to speak on their behalf, from the state's perspective, in those areas where that's needed, I think the additional foundation aid and other operating aid can hopefully help support that. There are some building aid components. Our role as an association is to help our members, to help school districts navigate that process. So yeah, I think that's a concern for some of those districts that will have to make a decent amount of facility updates or changes. We're trying to make sure to bridge the gap between the education department and districts to allow for a time to make that transition in a way that doesn't have negative financial consequences for districts.
Excellent. That will be a big concern coming up over the next couple of years. Brian Fessler from the New York School Boards Association. Brian, thanks so much for your time. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
More funding is needed to keep New York's bridges and roads safe. That's according to one study released this week. The details on how much the Thruway needs and where that money could be coming from. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. One item not mentioned in this year's state budget plan, additional funding for the New York State Thruway. But according to one report, the Thruway system is in dire need of some funds for safety repairs. According to a study by National Transportation Research nonprofit, Thruway needs roughly $1.2 billion over the next 8 years to maintain safety and service levels. Funding for the Thruway comes from profits made at those rest areas and, of course, tolls. Now, there's no plan in place to increase tolls next year, but some experts are suggesting the increase won't be enough to meet the demand. The New York Thruway Authority releasing the following statement on that survey. It reads in part, quote, "Another indication of how critical it is for the Thruway Authority to increase revenue, as we do not receive any dedicated federal, state, or local tax dollars to cover the costs of operating and maintaining the Thruway." All right, stick around. We're going to be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. But remember, if you've got a comment, a story idea, let us know. You can always email us at news10news@news10.com or reach out on Twitter @WTEN. And finally, from us here at Empire State Weekly, with the state budget officially passed, a little under a month left in session, we're keeping an eye on the late additions lawmakers may be looking to address before their session comes to an end. When asked what comes next, here's what State Senator Jim Tedisco had to say.
Well, I think we have to work on all those pieces of legislation for the quality of life, that we can help our individuals want to build a house, get an education, build a business, find a job, and we're months behind right now because of the delay, so we have a lot to work on, I guess.
The last day of the legislative session is scheduled for June 8th. That could change. We'll keep an eye on it. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. We'll see you back here next week. And don't forget, you can catch Empire State Weekly all over the state of New York. Here's our full schedule of where you can see us on 10 television stations across New York.